Hello everybody, happy Tuesday. Here is another lesson on percentages. Quick reminder from yesterday. Yesterday we learnt that of, I'm just trying to get my pen working. There we go, I hadn't turned the pen on. Yesterday we learnt that of was the same as times when it comes to working with percentages. So 75% of 100 is the same as 75% times 100. We also learnt that if you have 3 over 100, that's the same as 3%, which is the same as 0.03. So we did some work on equivalent fractions, decimals and percentages. Okay, so we're going to start by having a look at the sheet that you did yesterday, and I'm going to give you the answers. So if you haven't got the sheet with you, just pause the video and go and find the sheet. Okay, so the answers, I might have to write them outside the box. I'm not sure if I can write that small. 23 over 100 is... no, I can't write it that small, is 23%. Below that, 84 over 100 is 84%. 7 over 100 is 7%. And 70 over 100 is 70% is 70 over 100. Some of you might have spotted as well that you can actually do cancel that fraction down to 7/10, which we won't talk about too much today, but some of you may have spotted that one as well. And you can do the same. This one you can cancel down as well. That's it. That's the only other one. So you may have spotted that you could simplify. Sorry, not cancel down. You could simplify those ones. Moving on to the next set of questions. 0.34, so now we've got decimals, is 34%. We'll come back to the one below, so we'll move over to this side now. So 0.17 is 17%. Looking at this one here, 93% is 0.93, so you needed the 93 there. Now this one here, you may have got 0.50, but then if you remember, we don't need that final 0 unless we're working with money. So the technically correct answer is 0.5, also just having a 5 in the box. If you got 50, that's okay, but even better is to not put that last 0 on unless you're working with money, which we weren't in this question. Okay, moving on. Underneath, we've got fraction to decimal. So we've got 57 over 100. We've got, now, it's not 6% because think of what we did up here. It's 60% because that last 0 has been removed. Remember, it's 6/10, which means 6 whole 10 sticks, which would fill up 60% of our square. So it's 60%, not 6%. So just double check you got that one. Over here, we've got those single digit ones that we spoke about yesterday. So that's just equivalent to 3/100ths blocks. So it's not 0.3, it's 0.03. So we should have 0.3 in that box. And the same here, we should have 0.9, 0.09. Okay, so at the bottom we do have some money now. 26p is what percent of £1? To do this, you have to work out how many pennies there are in a pound, which is 100. That's useful because we're working with 100. So if we're working with that 100, that's our whole. Our £1 is our whole, which is the same as 100 pence. It must be 26%. It's 26 out of 100. Again over here, how many centimetres are in a metre? It's 100. So our whole is 100 centimetres. Very handy that we're working with 100s. So 4% of a metre would be 4 centimetres. 40% of a metre would be 40 centimetres, but that single digit means it's only 4 centimetres. Okay, moving on to the next sheet. Fred ate 76 hundredths of a giant bar of chocolate. You piggy Fred. He had eaten how much percentage of the chocolate bar? Nice and easy, he'd eaten 76%. Sarah negotiated a £47 discount off the price of a guitar costing £100. The guitar had how much off the original price? Now, you will get harder questions than this later on in the week, but at the moment this is nice and simple. She negotiated a 47% discount off. So what percentage was off? Well, it's out of 100, so it's 47%. Later on, you'll get harder ones like this, where you have to work out how much was taken off when it's not 100, not a multiple of 100. So it's not £100 or 100 pence. But we won't worry about those now. Okay, this was your previous learning question. The volume of this cube made from bricks is worked out by calculating 3 times 3 times 3. I need 27 bricks to make it. To change this cube into a 4 by 4 by 4, I would need 3 more bricks. Explain why Jack is incorrect. Well, what Jack's done here is he's just added 1 more to each of these 3s. He's added 1 more to each 3, and that's incorrect. If you remember when we did cube numbers, it was during lockdown, a couple of weeks ago, no, it might have even been last week, we found out that a cube is timesing itself by itself by itself. So 3 times 3 times 3 does equal 27. 3 times 3 is 9, times that by 3 is 27. However, for 4 cubed, you're not doing 3 times 3 times 3, you're doing 4 times 4 times 4. So it's not simply adding 1 to each of the numbers. So 4 times 4 is 16. Now we need to times 16 by 4. Well, 16 times 2 is 32. So if I double that, I will get my answer, which is 64. So there's quite a big difference between 27 and 64. It's certainly more than the 3 bricks. So that's how you would kind of explain that question. Now, at the bottom, place these proportions, and that just means sort of comparisons, in order of size. Explain how you know. Well, what we want to do is convert them all into the same thing. I think I'm going to convert them all into fractions. So I can't quite read that one because this page is very small. Is that 23? Okay, I'm going to say that's 23 because I can't quite read it on this page. I made it quite small so it would fit on. So let's look at number 1 here. As a fraction, 27% will be 27 over 100. And this is fine for explaining, just converting them all into the same thing rather than using words. Now I think that's 23 over 100. I might have got that wrong, in which case I might not get any of these right. But let's just imagine that's 23 over 100 for now. 29 out of 100, we can simply just write that as a fraction. And then 0.28 would be 28 over 100. And then we can write them in the right order. Well, assuming this one is 23 over 100, you would know that better than me. That will be the first one. When we write them in the boxes, you need to write them as they were originally. So go back to their original layout, not the ones you've got in your explanation box. So the next one, if we look down here, is going to be 27 over 100. But in the box, I write 27%. That's a percent sign there. The next one is 28 over 100, which was 0.28. And then 29 out of 100 goes at the end. Write another smaller proportion than any in the set using the word hundredths. Okay, I'm going to say 18 hundredths. Excuse my writing, I'm writing right at the bottom. I could have also said there 1/10 and 8 hundredths. And 8/100. It's the same thing. Okay, so let's move on to today's lesson. We have a pizza here. Now we're going to be looking at today well-known fractions. I'm not sure well-known is the right word to use, but basic fractions, fractions that we use a lot. So my whole pizza here, the fraction is simply 1. It's 1 whole. There's no other fraction for it other than 1. Okay, so there is my one whole pizza, which means I've got 100% of my pizza. The decimal is also 1, so this is the fraction and the decimal, and this is the percentage. But if we now go on to another pizza, and I am now going to, very sadly, rub out half of that pizza. Now you've got to imagine that this is exactly half, because of course they've got to be equal. What I've now got is half of the pizza. The reason it's 1/2 is because it's 1/2 out of a possible 2. Okay, so there's my 1/2. My decimal is 0.5. And if you remember why, when you've got your 100 square, split into tenths, remember each of these is a tenth, half of those will be 5 of the tenths coloured in. We're going to go on and talk about this in a minute, but that's why it's 0.5. As a percentage, can you work out what it would be? If 100 is whole and we've got half of that, it's 50%. 50 is half of 100. Now, what about on this pizza, if I were to eat half of my pizza and then half of that? So I'm left with this, which means out of a possible 4 pieces now, I've got 1, which is 1/4. Now, as a decimal, you might remember that's 0.25. Again, we'll talk about it in a minute, but that's because we've got 2 10 sticks coloured in and 5 hundredths coloured in. All of this is coloured in, so that gives us 0.25. That's our 1/4. So can you work it out as a percentage? If 50 was a half, we've got to halve 50, which is 25%. Can you see the connection? If you want to find another connection, another way of saying 1/4 is 25 over 100. The same way of another way of saying a half is 50 over 100. Can you see the connections? Can you see the connections? Okay, what I want you to imagine now is that we've eaten this much of the pizza. Can you see where I'm going here? So now I've got 3 out of 4 pieces. An equivalent way of saying that is 75 over 100. And that's because 75 is 3/4 of 100. As a decimal then, it will be 0.75. What would it be as a percentage? Use those patterns. 75%. Look at the connections there. So those are some basic fractions that you know. And we can look at those on a 100 square as well, like we just did. So our 50% is half of the square. So this half, coloured in, is 50%. Okay. By the way, I quite often do a little line at the top of my 50 just because it's quicker to write. Don't worry about that. You don't have to. That's just how I do them. Oh. So you don't need to worry about. You can just do yours with like that. Okay. So that's our 50%. And another way to say that, if you remember, is 5/10. There are our 5/10. 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10. Or 1/2, or 0.5. Okay. And then we looked next at 25%. So let's look at why it's called 25%. Well, it's a quarter. So we're going to colour in this 10th here, sorry about the bad colouring. And if we coloured in a third one, it would be too many. So we just want 5 of the next one. That's a quarter. And if I did that 4 times, it would fill up the entire 100 square. So that's equal to 0.25. And of course, it's also 25 over 100 as a different fraction, and 25%. But then for 3/4, it's our half, all of this, plus a quarter. So we colour in all of that and the 5/10. And that's our 0.75, 75 over 100, which equals 3/4, or 75%. Some other basic fractions that you will be able to work out. I know there's a quicker way to do this. There we go. Some other more basic ones you'll be able to work out. If I just colour in one of these 10 sticks, I've coloured in 1/10, 1 out of my 10 sticks. That's the same as 0.1, remember we don't need the 0 on the end, or 10%. Look at the patterns. You have that 0 that you don't need, 10, 10, 10. Of course, I could double that and colour in a second one. What would that percentage be? 20%. What about if I had 8 of them coloured in? It would be 80%. So now, what about if I just had 1 square coloured in? What percentage would that be? 1%, or 0.01, or 1 over 100. If I had 6, it would be 6%, 0.06, or 6 over 100. So, here's just a couple of destination questions we're going to have a look at together. Spot the mistakes. Have a look at this first one. One of those 3 is incorrect. Which one do you think it is? Did you say this one? If you did, you were correct. As we saw previously, if it's 0.02, that means in our 100 square there's only 2 squares coloured in, which means that shouldn't be 20%, it should be 2%. Well done if you spotted that. What's wrong with the next one? Which one of those 3 is incorrect? 75%, that's 75 of the squares coloured in. 75 out of 100, that's 75 of the squares coloured in, but only 1/4. That's only 25 of the squares, so I don't think that should be 1/4, I think it should be 3/4. Let's look at the next one. Now this one isn't technically incorrect, but it's not very elegant, it's not how we do things. So what's something there that isn't quite right? Did you spot that 0 on the end? We don't need it. That's better. Unless you're working with money, of course. Okay. Position the following amounts on the number line below. Look at your landmarks, 0 and 1. That means before I put anything on, I'm just going to mark that that is 50%, or a half, or 0.5. Okay, 3/4. Well, if this is my halfway mark, this is my quarter, so my 3/4 will be over there. 0.25. That means I've got 2 10 sticks and 5 hundredths. That's the same as a quarter. So that one would go there, quarter of the way through. 100%, that's easy. That's the whole thing. 4/10. Now that's tricky because 50% is 5/10. And 0.25, well, we know that is 25 over 100. So 4/10. Let me put these as decimals instead. 0.5, 0.25. So it's going to be in between those two. I think 4/10 is going to go about there. It's going to be in between the two. That one was a tricky one. Okay, here's your work for today. Now this is actually from the sheet, and it's a tricky one because last year I did this with my class and hardly anyone got this right, and this was the reason why. So we're going to do this one together, although it is one of the ones from your sheet. Again, if you haven't got a printer, don't worry, just draw out some rough 100 squares. If you haven't got these colours, don't worry, you can choose other things. So 25% of the square is blue. 25%, 25 squares. So that's 10, 20, 5. Okay. 20 out of 100 are red. Now I could start another row and do 20 there, but I want to fill up what I've got. So that's 5. If I do a whole row there, that's 15. And I need another 5 to make it 20. There we go. Right. Now, I think there's a bit of a mistake on this question. I think that blue should be yellow. It's another reason I chose this question, because otherwise you've got blue twice. So I changed that to yellow. Now, this is the one that got everybody. 0.07. It's that 0 that's tricky. It doesn't mean 7 tens, it means just 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's it. Okay. We'll come back to the orange. What about the purple? See if I can change to a purple. 1/10 is purple. There's my 1/10. Okay. 6 over 20. This one is tricky because the bottom number, the denominator, is not 100. Can we make it 100? Let's just try making everything bigger. So, if I doubled them both, I'd have 12 over 40. Still not 100, but they are equivalent. Let's try, let's try going to 60. So I've counted 6 was 20, 12 was 40. If we're using our same multiplications, we're going up in 20s along the bottom and 6s along the top. 20, 40, 60, 6, 12, 18. That's 60. So then 80 will be 24, which means 100 would be 30. So I'm going to colour in 30 out of 100. That was a really tricky one, and that's why I did that one with you. That was the hardest one, I think, on the sheet. Some of them are a lot easier than that. But the main thing to look out for is the 0.0s. So when it's just hundredths, but when you're colouring in tenths. It's a tricky sheet today. So we now need to actually answer the question, what percentage is uncoloured? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So as a percentage, 8% is left uncoloured. They are easier than that at the start. That's a trickier one. Have a go at the work, and I will see you tomorrow. And tomorrow everybody will be doing the lesson because nobody's in school on a Wednesday, not even me. So I will see you tomorrow on Wednesday. Have a good day.